Legend. Done.
That is recording. Campy, good work from you.
G'day, my name's James. Welcome to the Oz F1 show. In this episode, we have a very special guest sitting next to us. It's Michael Lamonato. G'day, mate.
Hello, mate. How are you guys doing?
Doing very well. Thank you. As Campy sits behind the camera and puts a noise on. He's our producer for this episode, so if it all looks terrible, it's his fault. Mate, it's great to have you along. We were just chatting before we started recording and saying how wonderful the small community of Formula One is in this country. But what I'm interested about is how did you get to being a motorsport journalist in Formula One specifically?
It's not a direct story because it's not something I ever really thought I was going to do. Even when I was at university, I was studying journalism, didn't think this was where it was going to go. It's one of those things where, and I feel like you guys have probably been on a similar wavelength. I think a lot of Australian fans have, where you don't feel like you know very many other people who are interested in Formula One.
Mm-hmm.
I was interested in Formula One because the race was in Melbourne, and that was almost 100% of how the interest came along. My dad kind of followed it, but not a lot. But I stumbled across while at university, and we were at community radio, one other person who was also interested in it. And naturally, exactly. And surrounded by, a community radio station, the next step was to start a program which was Box of Neutrals. And it sort of spiraled out of control from there. You finished studying journalism and sort of built up from there. But it was never a goal set out to achieve. It just sort of happened because we were interested.
Yeah. And as you said before we started recording again, the understanding of what having a small and independent or fan-based kind of journalism element from Australia just was unknown. So you really trailblazed for podcasts like us to be able to do what we do.
Yeah, there was one of the big things when we were looking it up, like trying to choose the name and all that kind of basic stuff, was look into how many others there were. And there weren't really any. There were none that we found at the time. And for a while we were running with the slogan something like Australia's only F1 radio show. What a long slogan that is. Terrible radio slogan. And we did find there was one guy who emailed us, I think from Tasmania, and he was like, actually, we were already doing this. And we were like, that's very funny. Well, maybe we'll change it to the mainland. And we got a really snarky response and never heard from them again. But for all intents and purposes, the first one.
Yes, the first mainline one.
Longest running, perhaps.
We love you, Tasmania. If anyone listens from Tasmania, which who knows if you have internet down there yet. Dial up, maybe.
It is in Australia, so probably not.
Yes. Oh,
the
mate.
slowest one possible. So you started about 2010.
Yeah,
right?
That sounds about right.
I'll
take your word for it.
It's just a long time. May have done some research. A long time ago. What was the point where you went from, okay, this is a bit of fun, community radio, which is very cool to do at the best of times, and then you go, I'm going to press the button on this and it becomes something bigger? What was the big break that turned it into what it is now?
So Rob, who was one of the co-founders of the show, along with Peter McGinley, if anyone ever sees him anymore, after we'd finished studying at the same university, I finished studying journalism, we went into a post-grad radio course at Swinburne. We were actually the last class, weirdly. We shut down afterwards. And that sort of taught us all the radio basics. We really thought Box Neutral was going into like a radio space.
Yep.
And then at the end of that, we started just cold emailing producers, and we got some back from like SEA and stuff like that, giving us great feedback. And I remember we got an email back. This was when ABC Grandstand was still sort of like a nascent digital station. They were really trying to set it up. And I got one email back from the GM there, and he was like, "Podcast is great. I reckon you'll go far." And I was like, cool. Well,
creative note.
Can we talk more? And he was like, I'll call you in an hour. And then all of a sudden he was like, yeah, why don't you come on the station? And I was like, well,
Whoa.
I mean, that's kind of what this email was for. I thought that would be implied in the air check situation. And so all of a sudden after, that would have been, I guess, 12 or 13, I think we went there. It happened almost immediately within a couple of weeks of chatting to him. It was the Spanish Grand Prix, I think we started. So around May time. And we were there for a couple of years. So that's sort of where it went. Onto radio like that, and it grew the whole time. But again, it was just another sort of I guess we'll see what happens, see what we can make of it. And things sort of came out of it.
And I guess you're pushing that, again, love of Formula One, and why we started is to try and get more people aware of it. Drive to Survive didn't exist back then. So
In the before Drive to Survive days?
Is there a before Drive to Survive in Formula One? I don't understand.
The dark ages.
It doesn't make sense to me. But so you started then having like some authority to talk about Formula One. What was the moment that you ended up actually at a track or able to do something live?
I think the first time, other than the Australian Grand Prix, because we got a couple of media passes in, I can't even remember the year, a couple of years into the community radio show. But there was after one, might have been the first year at the ABC, let's say, or maybe just the year before, we'd started sending the show, cutting it up a little bit, adding some extra bits to a friend of ours who was doing radio in Thailand, of all places. He'd gone there to do a breakfast show. And he was like, why don't we, first of all, it was like, let's talk F1 once a week, something like that. And then he was like, they really like the show. Why don't we just put it on the radio? We did some tops and tails for a different intro and that kind of stuff. And then, so he was doing that. That show was running there. And after the Australian Grand Prix, I remember it was like, another year till the next race. He was like, why don't you come over to Malaysia? We've got tickets. We're like, oh, yeah, okay, very funny. That's very amusing. Malaysia is the next week. And he called us on the Monday afternoon after Australia, before Malaysia. He's like, so are you coming or not?
Wow.
We're serious. Like we've got media passes because they're sponsoring the station, I think, the Malaysian Grand Prix. And I remember the next 2 days, I'd luckily already had a passport at that point. Rob was doing like the emergency passport, had to bring the form back twice because he signed the wrong place. Really last minute stuff. And that was the first, I guess, overseas race we went to. And that's when you certainly we started getting that taste of the idea of we can go to do races, do stuff at races. And then I think from that year, it was really building year on year the number of races we were doing. So it sort of started weirdly.
Do you miss doing that sort of stuff?
At the moment, yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Dumb question.
Looking at it's whenever you see somewhere you've been overseas, you can remember it so vividly in these COVID times. But it's strange not to be there now. And it's strange that it's been such a long time as well. Weird to think it's passed quickly. But
sure. What was the last race you were actually at?
It was Japan 2019, I guess.
Was that the Crazy Storm one? Was that the year after?
Was it? Yeah, it was. Yes, it was. It was the typhoon. Yeah, where they called off Saturday and ran on Sunday morning. Yeah,
that is a long time ago.
It was ages ago. You're right. Yeah, it's mental to think that, and who knows when we'll be able to get to another one. Bloody hard to get out of Australia at the moment.
Yes.
Yeah, I chatted to Kim Illman 2 weeks ago, who just made the decision that I'm leaving the country.
Yeah,
and I probably won't come back until the end of the year. And even if he does come back, it's likely in November. Maybe we get a race here or not, that he's going to quarantine for 2 weeks anyway. So that whole thing is just, is it even worth going? Probably not.
No, he got vaccinated. So.
Well, yes, which is
true. Good on him.
Ahead the rest of us. That is true. What's your favourite moment then? So you started, you went to Malaysia, which is cool. What was the pinch me moment for that sort of stuff?
It's hard to pick one. Been involved in lots of weird things that have happened at Grand Prix, whether it was, the cancellation here was a very strange event to be in the middle on. 2 typhoons in Japan, really weird vibe when that happens, and everyone instantly becomes weathermen as well. Everyone's like, no, it's a typhoon.
Everyone's looking at radars.
Is it a super typhoon? No, the wind speed is not fast enough. They were all very strange. I think the only real pinch me moment I've had, though, was not at a racetrack at all, but I was working on a different podcast at the ABC, and it was when I interviewed Murray Walker, and I've been lucky enough to interview him twice.
Wow.
And it's so strange. We were reflecting on this when he passed away, of course, earlier this year, is that I didn't grow up listening to Murray. He stopped in 2001, I think it was, wasn't it? I was only 10 years old at the time.
Yes.
And I'm not even sure if he was on the coverage here. I don't know, even though that was the Australian coverage. I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
But speaking to him and even thinking about him, he's more synonymous with Formula One than 100%. Any other sound, even more than the sound of the cars or any other commentator. And we've had good commentators since, no disrespect to them, but somehow he just was Formula One to me. And so when I interviewed him the first time, that was a real spine tingling moment to hear his voice down the line, answering things you were asking him and just chatting to him was really super strange. And I interviewed him again last year and it was the same thing. Having already spoken to him once, it was this exact same feeling. And it's sort of indescribable because it's almost like he's not a real person. He's like a concept.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that was probably, strangely enough, just in a studio on the phone at probably like 1 a.m. or something to line up with his time zone.
Wow.
The coolest moment for me. It's strange to say, but that was it.
Not at all. That's mega.
Yeah. It's he was just something really special, I thought, Murray.
Would you say that he, even though you didn't grow up listening to him, but now that you've sort of stepped into the journalist world and you're doing the broadcasting, that he is influential to how you would present, or do you have other people that sort of helped you along that process?
In a sense, not his style or anything like that. Certainly not. And I'm also not a commentator, so I guess not.
True.
But I like, and I think this is sort of a really good model for almost anything you do, is that he was, first of all, authentic, like super authentic and engaged. And I just think no matter what approach, not that I didn't like, I like to think that's the approach I take, not because of Murray Walker, but that I think they're good things.
Yes.
But if there's any sort of connection there, it's that I think the best people, like the most likable people, the best people you meet tend to have those qualities.
Yeah.
I think that's generally a good approach.
For sure.
I wouldn't say that he's like an inspiration because he did stop when we were young.
Yeah.
Yes.
But those qualities, I think, are something that people in Formula One shouldn't forget so much. I think that's part of the reason that he's so synonymous, is that super easy to get cynical in Formula One. The longer the season gets, the more sort of out of touch the sport becomes. Very easy to become cynical, but he never did.
Yes.
And I think that's really important.
Yes. Do you have any mentors or any other people you can point to in the paddock that have kind of helped or channeled your direction and things in that respect?
I wouldn't say so much mentors, but there are a lot of people I feel really lucky to have worked with over the years. And I will say, first of all, Rob, co-hosting Box for Neutrals, it seems redundant to say the show wouldn't be what it was without him, because it's literally the case.
Yeah.
But obviously a really big motivation because he brings something different to the show that I don't have, this different kind of creativity. Matt Clayton, who I co-host the Australian Grand Prix podcast with, has been almost kind of like a mentor, I suppose. He's been a much longer running journalist in Australia. I feel like we're all on that same wavelength. It's good to have more local journalists.
Yes.
And he's been really great to work with in that regard as well. And weirdly, not at all related to Formula One, going way back to the days when he started in community radio, just a friend of mine, also named Michael Stratus, who got me involved in radio in the first place. That he has like this outgoing energy that I didn't have when I was at university, that I still feel, I probably don't attribute to him enough, but he's a big part of why I ever got involved in the first place. Yeah. He hated Formula One for the longest time, really regretted, neglected, hated that I went and did this F1 podcast.
Yeah,
but
you wasted your talents.
He bloody loves it. Thanks, Drive to Survive. So,
yes. See, is there Formula One before Drive to Survive?
It comes back to it.
Doesn't exist, surely. So talk to us about not having podcast fade. I think we spoke just before we started about other Aussie podcasts that have come and gone. You've been around the longest. When did it develop out of ABC Grandstand? Because obviously not doing that anymore. What was the moment that you found out that you just still wanted to do it because you loved doing it?
I think so. And I think it's also, look, so Rob and Peter and I are all friends. We were friends before the podcast, first of all, friends without the podcast now. But it is one of those things that we kind of do. I don't know, it's a really weird bow to draw, but did you ever watch that Eric Banner film about his car, Love the Beast?
Yes.
Yeah, it's that kind of thing where it's like he has all those friends, like they're friends, but it's the thing you do with them.
Yeah.
And like we hang out outside the show and all that kind of stuff, but it's the thing that we've done for 10 years now, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So it seems almost inconceivable to not continue. So when the call came from the ABC, they've restructured Grandstand. They're changing the way things were doing to focus on, I still remember the phrase, AFL, NRL, cricket, and to a lesser extent the A-League, which I think is fair. We were like, well, we're going to keep doing it. And we found a way to do it. We found a studio to do it, which was, ironic in retrospect because for the last year we didn't need a studio to do it for obvious reasons.
Yes.
Yeah.
But we're back in the studio now, which is good. Yeah, it almost was never even, I don't even think we talked about the idea of not continuing with it, because it just seemed like, well, of course we would. It's the thing that we do and it's fun and we're still going to watch races. So why not have a chat about it?
Yeah, I love that. That's why I love doing this, as much as he doesn't reply to my text messages when I'm not physically here.
You're the Peter McKinley.
Yes.
Yes.
That's a terrible thing to say.
As soon as qualifying starts, I'm on my text messages and we are group chat.
Yeah, he'll when he inevitably disappears, he'll be called Formula Tommy T for our fantasy league when that ever happens. So talk to us about getting FIA accredited, because there's a lot of people who listen to this podcast who are also F1 content creators, which is very cool and very difficult to do on a budget and just getting into it. What was that whole process like? And with the French sort of like, okay, what credentials do you have?
Australia?
None.
It's bloody hard and bloody French. Like I had one.
Campy fist pumping behind the camera. Yep.
He's well producing.
Yes.
I had one editor of mine who described it as such, as being bloody French. The back end of like forget the way you're accredited, but just the system they use is incredibly convoluted.
Sure.
Yes.
But it's weirdly enough that connection in Thailand, one of the contracts, one of the deals I still have was with a paper that was associated with the radio station. And I don't know if it's just because there was no one else covering it from Thailand, or even maybe from a lot of Southeast Asia at the time, or whatever it was. But that was sort of like newspapers for a long time, maybe still do have it easier, I would say, in the accreditation system.
Right.
It's probably changed more recently. I mean, when I started going nearly a decade ago, I guess, you can't say websites were new, can you? But it's to the FIA,
Different.
they seemed new. And so the idea of getting accredited with a website was just too, like, the hoops they'd make you jump through was sort of really convoluted. And so fortunately, this was a more straightforward way of doing it, going via a newspaper, and still doing that, which means it still kind of works out. I think they're much more amenable to online now, because it's just the way the world's worked. I mean, even like Autosport presumably goes through the fact that they're a website before they're a magazine now.
Yeah.
But at the time, it was still sort of biased, I guess you could say, or maybe not biased, but tilted towards print media. And so print media was the way I got in, and I still do a bit of print media, and that's the way it worked.
Yeah, I have tried to go on to have a look at what accreditation looks like and have closed that tab about 17 times. I've gone, maybe I'll just have a look at what FIA accreditation. Never mind. I can't be bothered. It's just too hard basket.
When we were at the ABC, and this was with the permission of the content director at the time, we were like, the Australian Grand Prix is coming around. Let's try and do, we're not going to do comments or anything like that, but we'll try and do a show at the track or something like that. Like that's a cool thing with it on the ABC. Why wouldn't we? And we got in contact. It's not the FIA in that regard. It becomes the Formula One side of things. Like, we just want to do, all we want to do is be able to record, in the paddock. Maybe if we can, we'll do some interviews and stuff as well. We'll podcast that. And they came back with a number so large for the cost of that. I can't even remember what it was, because I was like,
wow.
I don't even know if I replied, or I made up an excuse. I was like, we'll get back to you, because it was just so like, there's no way.
The entirety of the ABC's budget, probably.
Yeah, exactly. So it was never going to be down that route. It always was going to be via a print route, because, to pay for it is crazy. So,
mate,
that's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, it essentially strays into broadcast rights, I suppose. But it's a funny grey area, probably with a lot of sports, isn't it? The difference between wanting the broadcast rights and just wanting to create what is now ubiquitous content, which is things like podcasts or any kind of online content that might be a bit video, might be a bit audio, whatever. But, is not really the same as doing a TV broadcast, is it? But no one's got the answer for that. Because, of course, if you're a TV broadcast, you've probably locked in the maximum definition of what TV counts.
I want it
as.
all.
Yeah, exactly. And so in some respects, you could say the sport's probably hamstrung in that way. But it'll change over time. It's changing a little bit now, but I don't know that we'll be podcasting there anytime soon.
No. And I feel like that's going to be our biggest go for when we ask for crowdfunding to get the rights off of Foxtel.
Yes.
That's what we want.
Which is what we just decided we were going to do on Saturday. I think we did our first pre-drinks, like a primer episode to the race. And Campy was like, actually, I'm sick of Foxtel. This sucks. And everyone, it's sort of a lot of DMs came through and like, I'm sick of paying all this money and not even being able to watch testing, for example.
And at the end of the weekend, you've got all the ads stuck in your head because there's only 3 of them that are on rotation during a Sunday.
And there's a lot more placements of those ads in between practice and qualifying.
As well,
Yes, as our producer friend is very sick of.
There's too many.
It is.
We're paying for it.
Yes. It's like, guys, settle down, really. And I think that's the biggest thing for our point of view in Australia is trying to get access to content easily to introduce people to the sport of Formula One becomes very difficult. So doing a podcast or a vodcast is a good way of doing that. When did you decide that you weren't busy enough and you wanted to do F1 Strategy Report and then a third podcast and the official In the Fast Lane one too?
I don't know if I'll ever decide that I'm too busy, not because I'm not,
Good
but
answer.
just because it's too hard to make that decision. It's because then you'd have to start turning something down, which is just not the way you're wired. The strategy report happened sort of a little bit out of the blue. It was originally the guy who runs it, Nathan, who's a friend of mine as well. Since has become a friend of mine, was originally running it himself. He was hosting it and he decided that he didn't want to host it, but did want to continue the podcast. He was like, oh, why don't you continue hosting it? And he sort of does all the backside stuff of it. I just do the podcast itself. And that's kind of just continued to grow. We've had a good couple of years as well. That's been sort of a nice thing to do. And it's like he's worked together on like the business kind of side of it, so I haven't had to worry about that. Whereas Box of Neutrals, we've sort of had to do everything.
Yes.
All I have to do is line up a guest and worry about the race, and then send it to him, and then I'll go to bed. And it's great on a Monday night at like 1 a.m.
Wow.
Time for sleep.
Yes.
But that's been really good, and it's a different side of things. When I started doing it, I can't even remember what year that was. Box of Neutrals is a completely different kind of show.
Yep.
So to be able to look into, it's not necessarily the technical side of things, the strategy side of stuff, which there isn't a lot of content covering at the moment. There's often like a couple of good sort of in-depth articles, but certainly nothing on the podcast side.
Yep.
Seemed like a logical next step. And yeah, it's been nice to see that grow over the last couple of years. It seems people are interested in it, which is always good.
Yes. So what about the opportunity then for In the Fast Lane? Because I think, you were obviously a go-to choice for someone who's a fan who's listened for a long time, but to actually get the official side to recognize that you know what you're talking about must have been a bit difficult.
Yeah, it was sort of, that was completely out of the blue because it was in COVID. And, this was at a time, I can't remember exactly the month, but it was like there was nothing going on. There was no races. There was no even confirmed provisional calendar. Everything was getting cancelled. Even the NRL hadn't started. And they never stopped, pretty much. And out of the blue, it came up. It was, again, Matt Clayton, who'd been talking to some of the guys there. And he was like, look, with no race prospect on the immediate horizon, because who knows how COVID was going to go, especially at that time. There was no idea that anything would even happen again. And they're like, wow, I guess they want to do a podcast to fill the time.
Yeah.
Like, great. I've got plenty of time to fill at the moment. Nothing's happening.
Yeah.
And so that then sort of grew out of that. It was originally going to be a month, and they were like, oh, actually, the first episode did really well. Let's do it every week. Like, cool, okay.
Yeah.
And then when everything started again, I was like, it seems very busy, but it was okay. It was really nice actually last year because obviously the Grand Prix Corp runs the MotoGP as well.
Yep.
And so I got to do a little bit of MotoGP, which I've been a fan of for a long time, but have never really covered. That's now weekly as well, and they've got a substantially more professional and experienced Chris Vermeulen running that as well. So it's better for them. But that's been a completely different sort of idea as well. To run an official kind of podcast is strange. Can't make jokes about rich energy for obvious reasons and things like that.
You can on this podcast.
That's great. I feel like it should be more acceptable everywhere.
Yeah, you know what?
Yes.
Yeah.
I actually saw a content creator on YouTube, Jimmy Broadbent, review a rich energy drink, and the photo was of him holding a can. I was like, surely that's just a Red Bull wrapped in something else.
I believe that every time I see one of the cans. Like, that's clearly not real.
It's not real.
It's CGI. Look at the black. It's too black. It
Can't be. You're not wrong. So has the best interview, it's outside of Murray Walker, through the In the Fast Lane stuff, is there a best interview that you've been stoked to be part of? And someone who you talk to, you're like, oh, I didn't ever think I'd get to chat to that person.
It's hard to say because, luckily enough, we got Murray on that podcast as well. But of all the interviews we've done, I'm really trying to think rapidly now. One that stands out is Johnny Herbert, purely because he was so long. It's like one of those things where, you line up an interview and these guys are all busy. Obviously, he was traveling with Sky Sports last year. And you're like, okay, we'll get you 15, 20 minutes. Like, that's great. And then he just, again, a super enthusiastic guy, right? A guy who really loves Formula One, being in it, loves chatting about it clearly. I think we got to 45 minutes. We're like, oh, look, we're conscious of your time. He's like, no, we'll keep chatting. And so he was really great. And he was really, really great to chat to. Super nice guy.
Yeah.
Has a lot of good opinions and insight, as I think sometimes we forget with some of the former drivers.
Yes.
Maybe because some of the more outspoken ones, like your Jacques Villeneuve's and stuff, give him a bad name. I don't know.
Yeah.
But he was really cool to speak to. But we've done heaps of fun ones, and inevitably you find that if you get them in the right mood, anyone can be good. Strangely, even the ones you think won't be, they end up being really nice. So he was a good one. Jensen Button was also really good. Another guy who was really generous with his time. And I think you've probably found as well on Sky Sports, he's almost like a hidden diamond there because I would never
More
have
JB.
guessed. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I haven't seen him this year yet on the TV.
I think Extreme E took all of his attention
yes.
and figuring out how to be a rally driver.
Yeah.
Because that was a good idea. And I think he's doing GT car work as well with McLaren too.
he's busy. He's a busy man.
He's busy.
Yeah.
Probably not as busy as you, but still a busy man. Probably a lot wealthier than you, than all of us combined.
Yes.
But he is a hidden gem. And I think with the, again, Australian coverage of it with such a UK bent, it's been so hard to find the authenticity that you spoke about with Murray Walker. And he just comes across as like he's really stoked to be there.
Yeah.
He's not wearing silly suits like Nico Rosberg
Nico
and
works
looking
really
like
hard on his outfits.
a criminal from Die Hard like he often does. And he's got insight because he still knows all the drivers. All the drivers respect him. You know, he took the story of him and BAR and Braun and leaving then what was going to be Mercedes, which was a mistake really on his part to go to McLaren in retrospect. But he's also chilled about it.
Yeah.
And he's just so happy to be involved.
Yeah, I feel like he's not chasing storylines or making up hidden kind of things happening. There's no agendas. He's like, this is what happened. Just like keeping it simple.
Yeah. And what an understated world champ. I almost forgot while we were talking about him that he won the world title.
Yeah.
And like, what an understated guy to go about that. And he doesn't hold that over anyone. Like you say, he's still really down to earth in the way he interacts with people and counts for a lot. It does come across even through the TV.
Yeah, absolutely. Might pause there for a second, Campy, if you want to redo the thing. Just press stop and then start it again.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the time zones and how terrible it is to be an Australian trying to watch Formula One.
Yeah.
Give us a rundown of your weekend. What does it look like? Are you nocturnal?
Yeah, well, I mean, when like Bahrain, why did they make that a night race? It's the worst, isn't it? Those races are really tough. The second Bahrain last year, which was properly overnight, I think that was 4 a.m., something like that.
I'm kind of about that. I'd rather get up early because I start work early as a coffee roaster. So that's kind of like just start my day earlier.
Yeah.
But I suppose different.
Well, yeah, I mean, the ones that are like 3 or 4 a.m. are right on the cusp. I like the US ones are kind of all right because they're right where you can go. You can write it off as like an early morning.
Yes.
But doing like, so to use Bahrain as an example again, you're getting up at when it was the overnight one, like 3 a.m. to do practice 2 and you're like, I don't care. Come on, guys.
Yeah.
So it's not just
a
me.
different time.
No.
Like, don't get me wrong. The practice feeds into the strategy stuff, all that kind of stuff. It's interesting when you're more awake.
Yes.
But at night, you're like, there's no one on track. There's been no one on track for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
David Croft is talking about some UK brand store that I don't know. You're like, I just don't want this. So sometimes it's hard.
Yeah.
Luckily, like we're right on the cusp, aren't we? At 11 p.m. most races, you can kind of get away with it.
Yep.
Really annoyed. I don't know if you were as well over the off season. There was a rumor they were going to go back to 10 o'clock, and I was like, yes, get in there.
Yeah.
And then they didn't. And then I heard a rumor they're going to go to midnight in the next year or two.
Please don't.
And it's a real roller coaster to be in Australia following Formula One.
Yeah.
Secretly, like I really love Canada. People there are very nice. They make great chips. But I'm not that upset if it's cancelled.
Yes, really.
It's horrible.
Don't need that.
Yeah. So as you're watching everything that's produced, what other kind of content are you watching and consuming over the weekend to kind of gather and form your opinions and get ready for the podcasts?
So I was trying to consume a little bit of everything, really. So yes, covering all the sessions, and then just seeing the different perspectives people take on it. So I think, like everyone, you've got your own sources, who are, and not sources, I mean like people you're texting, but like purely just
Sometimes.
websites. Sometimes you are texting people, but like even just the articles, from reliable people who are either on the ground or the next best thing, especially in COVID. Not everyone's on the ground anymore, but you're getting different perspectives on what's been happening and just talking to people like, I've got a WhatsApp group of colleagues, for example, we chat about whatever's happening. You just get different perspectives on it. I think that's the thing is that you can never do, especially when you're covering it from a distance, you can never do it on your own because there's just too much going on most of the time. You've got 20 drivers. Most of them are often pointing the right way. This year it's less common, but you need someone who's kind of across all of that. And that's why it's part of the things I really miss about going to the races is not just, being able to go anywhere that's outside of my own state, but it's that you're talking to people who are looking at things slightly differently, even if you're all doing the same job. And even being at the same table as them, being able to talk to them is is something that I do miss as part of the job. And it's harder now. It's changed the way we work. I mean, it's changed the way everyone's worked, I suppose. But that is, trying to replicate that experience at home is mostly what you're doing in between sessions and during the weekend.
And so when is the podcast recorded? When do you get everything in a row to go, all right, pressing the record button?
It's all Monday. It's the day I sort of set aside to smash everything out, whether I've slept on Sunday night or not. And then it normally goes in some order, like the Australian Grand Prix podcast. If we're doing an interview that night, we'll do it that night. Then Box of Neutrals will come at some point. Strategy report whenever whoever's available. Try and knock them all over on Monday. Box of Neutrals goes out overnight.
Yep.
Strategy report normally first thing Tuesday. The Australian Grand Prix one, luckily I don't have to worry about it once it's recorded as well.
Yes.
Send
the audio and it's someone else's problem. They can put it up. But yeah, knock that all over on Monday, and then you sort of finish writing some other things on Tuesday and Wednesday, and then more often than not, as we're going to see probably as the season goes on, there's a race almost immediately afterwards. So you're back into the cycle again. Yeah,
it's going to be very busy. I think we've sort of been like, it's a bit boring after Bahrain 3 weeks later than this.
Yes.
And now, and
it's like being a Formula E fan. You never know when the next race is coming.
Nothing's happening. Even when there is a race happening. Nothing's happening. Just thinking about Stoffel Van Dorn playing more Modern Warfare rather than being the called reserve driver for Mercedes. Poor bloke.
Streaming is very lucrative now. Look, he can
allegedly
make money from that. Well,
he might make more money on Twitch than actually driving.
Let's
be honest.
Lando would be, let's be honest.
Yes. Well, that's also true.
Okay, well, let's talk about the 2021 seasons then, because I think we've had 2 races and some testing, and it'll be good to get your thoughts on Danny Rick. We say on the tin of the podcast that we're very Daniel Ricciardo biased, no surprises. We're also very Oscar Piastri biased in an F2 sense too, and obviously more so because he's from Melbourne rather than the West. We have to pretend like the West is okay. Although I do now do a radio spot anyway in Perth, so if you listen, I love you a lot. Thanks very much. But from a journalist sense, there is so much Australian crap that comes out about Daniel Ricciardo leaving Red Bull, leaving Renault, and how it was all the wrong thing. So as a proper FIA accredited journalist,
glad you put
please put everything right.
Yeah. Look, it's going to be one of those things you only get an answer to at the end of his career, right? Because everything in a Formula One driver's career is about getting to a position to win the world title or contend for the world title, which obviously he has not done yet. And you don't know if he ever will. You know, he's got the talent to do it, obviously, but it's all about being in the right place in the right time. I think one thing we can say almost for certain is that leaving Renault was correct.
Yes.
I mean, we know, again, only 2 races and things will change over this year and next year's what it's about, but you can see that he clearly has seen something that has made him uncomfortable, and it's sort of being validated in the results. Leaving Red Bull is a more almost philosophical question, I guess. And I go back to what Fernando Alonso used to say literally every year after he left Ferrari, saying, don't you regret leaving Ferrari? You're McLaren. They're terrible. And his answer would always be, well, if Ferrari hasn't won the title, then what's the difference?
Yeah.
I'm here to try and be in the best position to win the title. They're not winning it. I think McLaren... It's ridiculous to think now. I know. Will be the one that will do it first. Which is strange. But the same does apply with more cohesive logic for Daniel, which is that as long as Red Bull Racing is not winning the title, then it makes sense for him to try and find a place where he can be the number 1 or the lead driver or an equal driver elsewhere. Not that he wasn't equal with Max, but there was clearly an emotional side to things there, which he admitted, and I think Red Bull will tacitly admits in a way. Its press releases kind of give it away sometimes. Christian Horner on Drive to Survive gives it away, I think. The idea that Max is the guy they want to win, which is fine. Teams often choose a driver, and that's okay. If Red Bull at the end of this season dominates, which I don't think they'll dominate, but if over the course of a year they sort of overpower Mercedes, then you might be entitled to ask, well, maybe Daniel should have stayed. But then you'd have to ask, would he have beat Max Verstappen, which is another question, at a team that certainly has now become Max's team. Whether or not it would have been had he stayed is another question, but that's the only point I think at which you could start to say, well, maybe should he be having regrets? But for the time being, if there are no titles lost, then you can't say he's regretted anything yet.
I like that. That's a good way to put it. I do wonder, and I wonder if you could go and ask Christian, do you regret how Daniel was treated, and do you wish he was still there?
I think they definitely wish he was
I think
still
they'd
there.
have to, wouldn't they?
I mean, with not seeing how Perez is going to go this year, because I think he'll do all right. I think the fact he qualified so well is a really good sign in Imola. But for the last 2 years, I mean, how much would they have paid Daniel, and he asked the second time
Yep.
to drive one of those cars, because the number one thing they've missed is just a second driver who's consistent
Yep.
and is fast, which is everything that Daniel is.
Yes.
You could argue that Daniel's become a lot better having left Red Bull just by the things he's learned, and I think that's probably true.
Yep.
I think if he'd gone back, he'd probably put in an even better showing than he was at the time. But absolutely, I mean, all Red Bull wants is a guy that is Daniel, really. All they want is him.
Daniel, yes.
I mean, every team probably wants a little bit of Daniel in that respect.
For sure.
And they've definitely missed it, but I think they kind of missed their opportunity. And not that they obviously prefer Max, I guess, if you want to put it like that. Again, not in a favoritism kind of way, but they're the guy they want to win. So they can't regret that too much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think from our point of view too, it just seems that McLaren is a bit of culture, better leadership, like Andreas Seidel and Zach. Like, we love Zach. He's just
Can't
such
pronounce
a dude.
anything that's not American.
No, he can't.
But you got to love
Renault.
him.
It's like, what did you say? Renault. Danny Rick from Renault. What the hell is Renault? I don't understand.
Grand
Oh,
Prix.
Renault. Got it.
Yes.
Sorry. No idea.
Carlos.
But Carlos.
Carlos.
Yeah. But
Lando.
that's the whole thing, is like, it's just so good.
He's a good character.
He's a
He
great
is.
character.
Another guy seems really genuine, right?
Yes.
And he's affable because he's from a marketing background,
Yep.
but I don't think that he doesn't come across as a salesman, just as a guy who wants to engage people. And that's been really great for McLaren. Like, as good as all the things that Ron Dennis did, I think the time clearly passed him by.
Yeah.
And McLaren became a place that was not so enjoyable to work. I mean, we all remember that Fredo Frog story, where that's how employees were being rewarded, apparently, for doing well. And that's a McLaren that's been left behind, thankfully, for one that's being run by Zach Brown and Andreas Seidel, like you said, I think has been sort of like the magic source of that team.
Yeah. Yes.
And there's a lot of reasons to think that that's going to work out really well for them.
Yeah. And really none of them are trying to seek the spotlight. Like, they're just very happy for the drivers to do the talking on track. But their content creation is just next level. Whoever's behind their marketing at the moment it's the best on the grid by a long way. And I think just being able to really see a fairly unedited version of Daniel sitting in that car at Silverstone for his first run, and then again for testing, just allows, again, us and Australians to enter a little bit more of that space as to what it's like to be a Formula One driver and have an emotional connection with these guys rather than being left out in the cold. So what are you looking forward to this year as a race? Is there something that you happy to talk about?
I mean, I wish we were going to Mugello, because that was, I mean, Imola was great. I've come around to it even more so this year, but Mugello looked even cooler to me. And I think was a better for racing. Imola is great as a driver's circuit, but I think you get a little bit better racing. Although you could just say it's probably because so many drivers crashed into one another. Mazepin's on the grid this year, probably even better. But look, you never know, might pop up because races have already started. Well, we've already got one race dropping off, don't we?
Yeah.
Portugal will be fun, I think. But I mean, I think we're lucky. I know we knock the circuits a lot, and there are some circuits you could definitely leave behind.
Portugal.
Yes, that's one.
Sochi.
That doesn't it?
Yas Marina.
Also, yeah, that's another one. Yeah, there are a few.
Jeddah. We haven't even had that yet. But let's put that in the bin.
We can move past that one. But like some of them Suzuka, I'm looking forward to seeing again. That'll be great.
Yeah.
I think Singapore, as much as the racing's not always great, just the physical challenge of that track, I think is special, and I'm glad that has, at least up until now, stuck around in the calendar.
Daniel Luck,
Hope
Singapore.
it continues.
Yep.
Yes.
Those kind of classic circuits are really great. Even Silverstone started to produce in the last couple of years some really good racing. So I think those ones, especially considering we've got such a close fight at the moment. And the midfield, I know we say this every year, usually because there's nothing happening at the front. We're like, but the midfield's great.
Yeah, it's so exciting.
Renault. But the midfield Renault is really close this year, and a bit closer to the front as well, as I think McLaren's been proving, and even Ferrari a little bit. So the idea of going to a track that can facilitate racing, I think, is going to produce, hopefully, a spectacle that we're almost not used to seeing in the last couple of years. Like, it's, the last couple of years when we've had good race, we're like, man, Formula One, that's kind of good, isn't it?
Have you heard about this sport?
Yeah, and I'm hopeful that that's going to become more normal now. Touch wood. I know we've had 2 good races, and that's not going to last forever, naturally. No. But I'm optimistic that actually that's going to become more commonplace this year. And I hope that's not too much to ask for a sport. It's meant to be entertaining.
Yes. We said last year, we won't say any race is boring. Now that we've got races again,
we're so thankful.
And then Austria too, happy. We're like, I mean, it was boring. I know it's fine. It's good to have racing back. No last lap Lando that existed. So Japan is going to be interesting. If there is a COVID travel bubble, which is an Australian thing in Singapore, would be good to hopefully travel for that.
Yep.
We could all look at the drivers through a fence line somewhere. For the three of us, it'll be a long way back at a hotel that we could afford, which will probably be in Malaysia, to be perfectly honest. From a 2021 season, we've seen 2 races plus testing. Have you got a bold prediction that sort of sits maybe a little bit left of field?
I would have loved if this had been before the seaon, I would have said something about Sergio Perez. But so far, I mean, his start's been very good, and I would have loved to have said something like, I think he'll beat Max, but he's not going to. So I don't think that's going to happen. I think, and nothing seems as bold because now I'm thinking of what we've seen, but I reckon actually Esteban will show well against Fernando.
Interesting.
Because, I mean, I know it's only 2 races. And isn't it weird? I was thinking about this yesterday. Isn't it weird how many drivers are giving the excuse like, oh, it's a new team and I need time? I don't remember drivers used to say that, but Fernando's saying it, so I guess we should take something there.
It seems like all the new drivers are, though, aren't they?
They all, like, there's 5 or 6 you can think of off the top of your head. They're like, well, you've got to give them another month or 2 and they'll get better. And you're like, but it didn't. I think I said this yesterday. Sebastian Vettel, didn't he win his 2nd or 3rd race at Ferrari very early in his Ferrari career? And now he can't not even score a point. So I don't trust his excuse for that one.
No. But if Daniel says it, totally fine.
He's completely on the money.
Yeah, everyone else, put yourself in the bin.
I even think actually on that, I reckon Lance Stroll will beat Sebastian Vettel this year, which again does not seem bold anymore.
No.
When I just said it 2 months ago, you would have been like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Why would you say that?
Yeah, absolutely.
But this year, I don't know. It's hard to say. I think actually as well, McLaren will probably have a run from Ferrari for 3rd in the standings, maybe even AlphaTauri if they can finish a race.
Yes, if Yuki can stay on the track.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that but that's what's really great. I think we've become used to making predictions that we know will probably come true and then doing something kind of wacky to add in there. But it's hard to predict because I don't think there's anything you can almost say with confidence other than Haas is going to finish this. There's almost nothing else you could confidently put this year that is going to happen.
Yeah. Thoughts on, this is a boring topic and I hate to bring it up. And it's going to be track limits.
Oh, yeah. I love boring topics.
I know it's sort of like Ted's tyre talk. It's like he begrudgingly talks about it, but then discusses it very well.
Bring out the crayons.
Yes.
Oh, my gosh.
The Sky Pad really went downhill this weekend. But track limits, from your point of view, what should or should they not be?
I mean, I don't understand why it's not just the line because that's just what is obvious and easy. And you can, again, I don't want to always fall into the trap that everything needs to be super easy to understand for someone who just switches on the TV because I don't think any sport is like that. I mean, in the UK, aren't they talking about changing the name of a wicket in cricket to an out in one of the sports? Seems too much because it's just like all you have to do is watch for 30 seconds and you
know what that means.
Yeah. But the lines are only there to delineate the track. Like there's always something off the track, like whether it's grass or even other asphalt. Don't paint the lines if it's not going to be lines. Save the paint. Do something else. So I don't know why it's not just that.
And it's every track.
Because someone is then choosing something else.
Yes.
Why choose when you cannot choose and just have the line?
The best point I've heard. Why choose when you don't have to?
Yeah. I've never understood why there's alternative things in track limits. But
and then because it just makes us to have to talk about why Max Verstappen had to give the place back to Lewis Hamilton. And again, on people who are new to the sport, they're like, what?
Yeah, exactly.
What? But he just was faster. You're like, but because Michael Massey has decided on the second session after the first session, it's like, no consistency.
Changed it 3 times.
And that's the thing, isn't it? It's so crap because look how long we've talked about it
now. Already.
Nothing fires up more people than the phrase, I know we don't want to talk about this. But it is, it's like, you have to then say, they do that the safety car clearly does that thing on Thursday or Friday for the TV graphics. It's like, you don't have to do that if it's just the line everywhere. Like, you don't, why? And then you've got to say, well, they're going to do that at turn 9.
I think
but
Bert
not at
enjoys
turn
that.
14.
I was going to say, maybe that's the reason, is the fact that Bert just wants more time in the car to burn around and just do some Tokyo drift.
Yeah, well, quite possibly. And good on him.
Fair enough.
But he's got to take the penalty if he wants to go.
Especially driving the Aston now, which looks epic.
And sounds great.
He's getting a lot of variety, isn't he, in his life now?
Yeah,
I know.
What a job.
Don't know if I agree with the medical car going from a station wagon fairly low to the ground to the DBX, which when it turns a corner, it looks like it's going to roll over. Looks like one of Jeremy Clarkson's constructions in Top Gear. Like, that doesn't seem like a good idea.
It would be a very 80s thing to happen, wouldn't it? For
Yes.
a medical car to roll
To
over.
roll.
Yeah, roll over into
so
a
long
lake
as like
or something like
it's
that.
an old Rover that doesn't go very fast.
Yeah,
that should be
yes.
the safety car.
Yeah, they were great those days. Like, who's the doctor's driven in a rental car? Put that out there. Yeah, it's fine. Put a
Swift.
fire extinguisher in the back. It's enough.
It's so good.
Yeah. They were the days.
That's
They were
great.
The days.
So, anyone else in the journalism paddock outside of Australia that you just really love chatting to? I know that you speak to Ted sometimes on the podcast to sort of look back on races, and the one that you did recently, which was the Imola preview, but talking about the race from last year. Is it just cool to just sit and chat with him? Obviously remotely, but
Yeah. Yes. Everything's remote. I mean, it is. He's really another one of those guys who clearly just loves to talk about Formula One, really engaged. I think at the time as well, actually wasn't that Imola episode, but when we spoke to him earlier the year, he said he was particularly talkative because he was in quarantine and hadn't talked to anyone for 3 days. And so every
Human
answer was really
contact of
long.
some kind.
Yeah, which is it's nice. We can be a service for people.
Yes.
But I think it comes back to that rule. Anyone who is not past the cynical line in Formula One, which is sometimes really hard, but is always really interesting to talk to. I mean, there are lots of good guys. The 2 ESPN guys, Lawrence and Nate, they bring 2 really different perspectives to things. Luke from Motorsport, Luke Smith, he's like a can't say this anymore because he's not that young, but it was like a kid wonder. Like he started riding when he was 9 or something like that.
Wow.
And all these guys they're great because they're engaged and there are more. Like, there are plenty more, of course. Almost, I think to be involved in Formula One, you have to really love it. There are those who seem to be kind of checking the boxes, but there are not very many. Inevitably, they've either stayed too long or are actually football journalists who've been thrown onto the beat because someone's sick. Fair enough. You don't have to love it in that case. But I think that's one of the great things about being involved in Formula One, no matter whether we're here in Australia or at the paddock or whatever, is that people, you have to really like it to follow it. It's not something, like with the AFL, people choose a team because they have to follow it because otherwise they can't talk to anyone at work.
yes.
Formula One, you've really got to be engaged because you
in.
have to figure out things about track limits and you have to know who Michael Massey is sometimes.
Yeah.
And
Or stay
you
up
need to
late.
know, you need to know where Jeddah is because these things crop up and you've got to be like actively engaged to follow Formula One.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes it great, first of all, but I think that's what makes so many people who are involved in it really interesting because they are all there for a reason.
Yes.
And they're all really great to chat to for that reason.
So you had a brand new fan who walked up to you onto the street and said, how do I get into Formula One? What would you say to them is a good way of just softly getting into it?
Drive, survive.
Isn't that a Formula One? I thought it was Formula One
is
started in
Formula One.
2019 and there's
Yeah.
no history before
Yeah.
there. So yes, Drive to Survive.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think it's funny, isn't it? Because sometimes you'll say, well, if you watch a race, then you've got to deal with the commentary. And sometimes the commentary is not super accessible.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's too English, depending on who you're listening to.
Yes.
If they're English, that's great. Maybe that is the best way
Yes,
to do
yes.
it. I think, though, you've just really got to... it sounds really boring, but if you watch one weekend of every session... And I know practice is boring, but it's the best way to get a narrative of a weekend.
Yes.
And then you realize the storylines that underpin the sport. If you do just watch qualifying and the race, there's always too much happening for you to really understand what's behind that. Whereas if you watch practice, there's normally issues that are sort of ventilated. You don't even necessarily have to watch the shows around the sessions because they're often kind of repeating stuff that happens in the sessions.
Yep.
But if you just build up to a weekend, I think you actually learn a lot more than you would if you were asked to sit down and read things about it. Just engage with the sport on that level. And then there are so many different ways the sport is covered, really. There are the technical journalists, there are podcasts that cover it in like a fun way, that talk about the topics you probably picked up in the show. There are the ones that go really deeply into politics, all that kind of stuff. You can choose what you're engaged by. Like when I started becoming interested in Formula One, it was about the politics, weirdly. It was when Ferrari were threatening to break away from the sport in 2009, and there was the whole, it was 2008, I think it was earlier than that. All that kind of politics stuff was really interesting because it was ridiculous that it would ever happen.
Yeah.
So whatever then piques your interest, there's someone always covering it. And I think that's what is one of the other great parts about getting involved in Formula One as a fan, is that there's something to interest you there.
Do you have a go-to podcast that's obviously not the Oz F1 show to listen to?
Yes, favorite technical podcast. I don't know. I have a favourite actually. I normally dip in and out of a fair few of them, just depending on whatever the issue is. Like if it has been a political week,
it's great.
Then you go to the ones who are going to cover that really well. Or if there's people want to talk about rake, then you can go to a technical podcast and hear about rakes.
And hang out
If
camping.
you're going to gardening, or if you're on the ABC talking about a lawyer show.
People don't talk about that enough. They don't talk about rake. There's a lot. There's a lot of different ways to sort of slice that one. So I don't know if I've got a favourite, but there are plenty to go through.
Yeah, that's great. Well, finally, and you've been really good with time. Thank you. Before you jet off to have an interview with someone more interesting than us, and noting that you're normally on this side of the couch rather than the other side. What is a question that you wish someone asked you in an interview sense?
I knew you were going to ask this because you told me.
Yes, imagine that.
Yeah, and I honestly don't have a great answer. I mean, I feel like the question, what is the best way to get involved in Formula One? I feel like we've already talked about, but I feel like, if someone did want to become involved, maybe let's stick with that if we're talking about someone who is involved, is just to, I think, as we've sort of covered, be genuine and be engaged. If you don't enjoy it, you don't have to enjoy it and don't do it. That's fine. Like Formula One's not always cool either, so you don't have to feel like you've got to follow it. And just ask questions, because to go back to the idea that the people in Formula One are usually genuine and engaged because you have to be, people are really responsive. Like people are happy to usually answer emails or, probably don't have their numbers necessarily, but if you text them and you do, they'll probably answer you as well.
Yeah.
And if they don't, then you don't need to worry about those ones, because there are heaps who are just good people who are not there like just looking after themselves and like cutting throats to get ahead and all that kind of stuff. It is a community because it is a bit obscure, because it travels a lot, because people are from different countries. It is a really strong bond of people in Formula One. So if you did want to get involved, there are always people willing to help you. So I think it's not really an answer to a question. It's not really a question there, but it's like, I just think
it's
that's
something.
Yeah, I think that's sort of something that's worth remembering. If people always do want to know how to get involved, there are ways. You just have to ask.
Yeah. And look, mate, this is why we love your content, is that you are your own person. You're not necessarily being held over by anyone else to push a narrative one way or another, or not talk about rich energy, for example. But it's great. It's great, genuine content. We love what you're doing. So thank you for coming on to this show. Hopefully we can have you back to talk a little bit later in the season as well, which would be cool, just about everything that's going on. And, thank you for being authentic.
Thank you.
I guess.
I tried very hard to be authentic.
You have no other skills. Michael Lamonato, it's great to have you here. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you too for listening and watching this show. Do all the good stuff that people who do interviews and podcasts and YouTube do. And we'll catch you in the next episode of the Oz F1 Show.